Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Ruby Price, and today we're here to review the 2025 Japanese Grand Prix. Joining me today, we have Owain Medford,
Hello.
Louis Edwards,
Hello.
and Jawad Yaqub.
Hi everyone.
So, Max Verstappen returns to just Verstappen things after leading from pole position at Suzuka to claim a record-breaking fourth consecutive Japanese Grand Prix victory. Sporting a special livery in tribute to Red Bull's final home race with Honda, Verstappen controlled the pace and did exactly what he needed to do. Owain, given how difficult it clearly was to overtake out there today, did Max win the race on Saturday by putting in that lap for pole position? And how impressive was today's drive by the Dutchman?
I mean, completely. Nobody expected it. McLaren were 1-2, or fastest at least, in every single session up until Q3, and that's where we made the difference. So, like, it's honestly 12 milliseconds seems to have got them the win today. I think, to be honest with you, it's got to be down to Max as a driver. The fact that he can deal with the car moving around a bit, which allowed him to have that lower downforce setup. Um, I think McLaren maybe went for a car that's best in free air and free air alone. But obviously, in a racing scenario, we see it time and time again. Like we saw it with Williams a few years ago. Is that if you've got the straight line speed or at least that kind of aerodynamic efficiency, you can kind of weather the storm with using your dirty air as a kind of a weapon through that first sector at Suzuka. And then every other point, I mean, it seemed mechanically like he had a better line than Norris through the hairpin, or was at least getting off that corner a lot better. And that was making a huge difference coming up to Spoon and 130R. As much as there was uh, the McLarens will make up time in the first S's. By the time that they got round to any point of the circuit where you actually need to haul into the back of the car in front, Max was gone. And he had he had enough straight line speed just to keep that 1 second advantage going into the DRS zone, which is the only place that you can really start to affect an overtake. And I think that was where it was sort of made. It was a perpetual problem of McLaren not feeling that they had any other option to go, try and get closer through the S's, um, and Max just sort of dealing with it and controlling the race and completely negating, strategy aside, completely negating the fact um, that McLaren had two cars in the fight, despite their inability to use them. Yeah, it was sort of completely sorted, and they ran the best race of the field there. It wasn't pulling out huge gaps, but you didn't need to, just with how dominant they were in controlling it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, there was no need to build up a, massive gap because if it was actually more advantageous to have the cars basically running right behind you in that dirty air, as you've mentioned. And of course, this is probably the smallest gap I think Max Verstappen has actually led the Japanese Grand Prix by, given, I think in recent years it's been about 40 seconds and 10 seconds, 20 seconds, just to see it being, barely under 2 seconds in 2025. I think A shows, a different race that we've had today, but also shows that McLaren were in the picture at the very least, Louis. They were the main competition for Max Verstappen racing, on his 61 points in P3. But, they spent most of the race within 2 seconds of that Red Bull. We knew it was going to be a race of strategy and obviously having two cars versus just one Max Verstappen. Was this a race McLaren could or should have won?
I'm firmly in the belief that McLaren should have won this race. Um, and it comes to the simple fact, like that Red Bull, and I'm not negating anything that Max did today. I think he drove as close to possibly a perfect race as you can. Given the circumstances of his car, the track, and what else was going on. Max didn't put his foot wrong, but for some weird reason, it seemed like McLaren were expecting Max to put a foot wrong, something to happen at the McLaren. There was no urgency. There was nothing to kind of let's push. Let's actually try and win this race. McLaren sat back, as they often do, played it far too safe, and just let the win, escape for them because every lap their chance of winning kept decreasing. They, made the call to Lando, oh, box to overtake, like box to overtake. Then they didn't, and then they're like, oh, don't worry, Lando, your pace is good. And then boxed him the same lap as Verstappen. Like just screwing the pooch royally with the strategy there, not even trying to maybe get it, give Lando a lap in the, in the open air to try and get some sort of overcut. Not even trying to box before and try to get some kind of undercut because a lot of drivers were going for that undercut and sometimes it was working, sometimes it wasn't. I think McLaren was just playing it far too safe, not taking the risk that it needs to win. You have two cars there, you can do something with Oscar, you can do something with Lando and stay, on the normal strategy with the other. And even if it goes horribly wrong with the other, at least you still have the other car there to push and try and maintain that pressure on Max. But no, they just plodded round behind him within 2 seconds, practically the entire time, not doing anything, not even trying to win the race. They could have, and I think the best option that they really could have done in the last kind of 15 laps, let Oscar have a go. Oscar was right on the back of Lando, didn't seem to really be like saving his pace like Lando was. It was getting clearer and clearer towards the end that Lando did not have the pace to catch up and overtake Verstappen. As Owain kind of mentioned, Lando would keep gaining all this time and then just dropping 2 or 3 tenths and just losing out. But Oscar seemed a lot more consistent. They should have at least let him have a go and try and do something. It's like McLaren was just happy to sit back and say, oh, second and third's fine. It's like, no, this is a year that you should be dominating this championship. And you've won the first two races. Great, I'm sure you're happy. But then now you can't allow Max to keep picking up these big points because he's only a point behind Lando now. He's 1 point behind in the championship. It's just this weird thing that McLaren seem to do. They always seem to drop off early in the race, always try and save their tyres at the start, but then never use them at the end of the race. What's the point? Seriously, what is the point? McLaren need to just sort themselves out, be more aggressive. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong, but at least you tried. When it was Red Bull and Mercedes, Mercedes would throw out weird strategies, try and upset the Red Bull. Red Bulls would throw up a weird strategy, try and upset the Mercedes, try and offset the balance, try and force Red Bull to do something that they don't want to do, rather than just playing it safe, letting it pan out, because that is what Red Bull and Max Verstappen want. They don't want any pressure. They don't want any threat. They're happy to plod along. Max can drive at the front of a pack for as long as you like. He won't make a mistake. He won't do something stupid.
Yeah, it really is that case as well, and it's that point that you've said, McLaren needed to do something because Max Verstappen isn't going to crack under pressure. He doesn't crack under pressure. That's one of the things we've seen about him through the, however decade at least now that he's been in Formula One. He's shown himself to be so resilient. Obviously, yes, he has made mistakes earlier in his career, and there are some people who will point to his styles of defending and things like that. But that's not pressure. That's Max Verstappen. But Jawad, Louis mentioned this briefly. Verstappen's win puts him 1 point behind Norris in the Drivers' Championship. But if McLaren had swapped their drivers, Max would be leading if, they didn't manage to do like a reverse swap or anything like that. Taking account into obviously Louis' comment, was there anything else McLaren could have done today?
Nothing other than what Louis already, so eloquently put. I think it's a frustrating situation to sit here when they've got the clear fastest car of the pack and they aren't able to really just, get their knuckles into it and be aggressive when it comes to taking control of a race. I think, on the pace that we saw today, and I was looking at the lap times and the sector times as well, they were quick enough to finish 1-2 if they had just done something differently or had been a bit more aggressive if they had elected to let Oscar pass Lando in those last 15 laps so Oscar could go after Max. And had he had taken the lead off Max, there's a chance Lando could have, come into second as well. There are all the hypotheticals you think about afterwards, of course, with the benefit of hindsight. But the fact that Max is only a point off Lando now at the top of the standings, I mean, this is where it's concerning that after the year that we had last year, where sure, the points weren't close enough for Lando to, genuinely have a title fight against Max, this year where they've started the year on zero and, Lando can establish his own advantage, they throw that away early, then, you've really got to start asking question marks. And I, understand that Lando has come with the perspective that you can still be a nice guy and win the championship. That was his line coming into this weekend. And you could say that about McLaren overall with the way that they've kind of handled this race and given the win to Red Bull in this respect. But I think you got to be a little bit more aggressive. And, you can compare them to when Mercedes had the clear fastest car 2014, 2015, where it was purely the two Mercedes drivers trading wins with each other, and it was the odd day that when reliability didn't go their way, that someone else got a win. Fact that, we've talked about McLaren having this dominant car, but we've had three different winners in the first three races, four if you include the sprint as well, when Ferrari getting up there. This could be game on, and it's going to be painful watching if McLaren continue to kind of throw away good results like that. And, looking at where Oscar is in the championship too, he moved up to third today. Because he was on the back foot after what happened on Australia. But, George Russell was still up there as well in Mercedes. I was kind of surprised not to see him a lot quicker given the race pace that they demonstrated in practice. So, this fine margins we're talking about. And yeah, 24 race season is a long time, but you're going to have to establish an advantage early like Max did last year if McLaren have a hope of winning the Drivers' Championship this year with whichever driver.
Yeah, the good thing at the very least means that it is going to, the intrigue around the Drivers' Championship is going to continue further into the season, of course, as we see the tight championship we've got, which is what we were always expecting. But, if McLaren want to see themselves, with one of their drivers, in P1 at the end of the season, they need to be capitalizing on opportunities whilst, teams aren't capable of performing at the level that they should be doing. So yeah, absolutely, 100% McLaren could and should have won today. But ultimately, Max Verstappen did exactly what he needed to do. The only time Norris was within 1 second was when he was alongside him coming outside the pit lane and at the start of the race. But ultimately, it's coulda, woulda, shoulda. Had they put Piastri ahead, would he have caught Verstappen? Maybe. We'll never know because McLaren didn't give it a try. And neither will McLaren, although I'm sure there's something in the data that they'll point to. But, all of the talk of going into this race, Owain, was around the brutal driver swap between the Red and Racing Bulls. Liam Lawson outqualified Yuki Tsunoda, but on race day where it counts, Yuki has at least managed to get ahead of the Kiwi. How do you think both drivers have responded to the switch so far?
I mean, I think relatively well. I mean, I don't want to sit here and draw conclusions for whether Sonoda will stay in that seat long term, but he, obviously qualified better than Lawson has in the past two races. But then again, Lawson obviously outqualified him, so that's a bit, it's a bit difficult to say. What we can say is that in the race, at least, I think strategically, Red Bull were better than the Racing Bulls were generally. They pitted Tsunoda slightly earlier, and I can't remember what stars they started on, unfortunately, respectively. So, but unfortunately, it kind of I was looking at the gaps, and it was kind of looking like it was kind of looking like they were going to kind of stay together, which I think was a bit worrying for Yuki. But despite that, obviously that didn't really happen. He managed to open up the gap with the small. I don't think there was a meaningful undercut there. It wasn't particularly cold. Sorry, it wasn't particularly warm, which would obviously degged the tires more, and the first sector was completely repaved. So, there wasn't a lot to dent the performance of the tires, much as McLaren found out. Um, and to that end, it was just sort of eking out a small gap. I think that's what Yuki managed to do, lap after lap, and that's what enabled him to finish 12th rather than Lawson's 17th. So obviously that's much better for Red Bull, but still, unfortunately, as we've mentioned, it's still not really good enough for a car of Red Bull's caliber. Obviously, the qualifying was not great. Yuki needed a lot more downforce, and I think that's possibly hurt his progress a little bit in the race as well. Um, but maybe with a better qualifying position, as he gets more comfortable with the car, um, this is going to benefit him more and more. That's the hope, at least. But on the face of it, it's still Max Verstappen scoring all the points, which is not what Red Bull need. It's currently costing them in the Constructors' Championship. They are third behind Mercedes, who haven't reached anywhere near the heights that Red Bull have, very clearly. And yet they're above them in the championship just because they have two drivers who are scoring points and keeping out of trouble, seems to be their plan for the season. Between the two drivers, I think Yuki's probably, obviously it's nice for Lawson. It's comfortable. He can rebuild his confidence there. Yuki seems to have hit the ground probably as well as you can expect with only sort of a week's notice ish. Um, and I hope it sort of it's a sign of things to come. I mean, you got to think that this is his first race in the car at a track that he obviously knows well, but isn't. Um, it's not sort of the easiest to get up to speed with. It's a very drivers orientated track. But I think currently I can't believe we're saying this, but like he's currently doing enough to keep the seat. But he needs to be scoring points, and unfortunately they didn't. So it's a good performance against his benchmark, but let's not forget that Isaac Hadjar is up there in eighth place in a car that is supposedly slower. You know, so I think that's really the big issue there is that they need Yuki needs to at least be beating Hadjar, and he's not.
Yeah, but I think reinforcing the importance of qualifying, around Suzuka, of course, with Sonoda, not really necessarily being able to move much further up the grid. After a disappointing qualifying yesterday, he will have not wanted to be behind Lawson at that point. But I think Red Bull will have just been very happy to see two Red Bull cars in Q2 for the first time in 2025. But of course, they didn't swap the two of them to see Yuki Tsunoda finishing outside the points. But at the same time, as you say, it's been a week. Let's give him at least, bold idea. Let's give him a season. Let's give him a season to actually show what he can do. But regardless, ranting aside, if you are enjoying this podcast, we'd love it if you could take five to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And also, if you're listening and aren't currently subscribed to the channel, please consider helping us out with a like and a subscribe. So yeah, let's move forwards. Leclerc then, Louis, he finished ahead of Russell and Antonelli with Hamilton a little further back in P7. It leaves Mercedes in P2 in the Constructors' Championship with 75 points. Ferrari are in P4 with 35. Factoring in the DSQ and China, obviously, for Ferrari. But how did you see the battle between these two teams today?
Um, I mean, I think Ferrari will be at first grateful that not only have they got both cars finishing, but of a legal weight, and they're not going to. Well, there's been no talk about them being disqualified yet. Um, you never know. It's the FIA. They do like to take their time with a few things. Um, but I think it was given the way that the kind of the race went today, it didn't all change that much. I mean, Ferrari were trying an alternative strategy with Lewis. They started him on the hard tires. He managed to make his way past Hadjar off the start, and then he was on the medium tires later on the race. I think But I'd say I personally was expecting a bit more of a charge from Hamilton in that kind of latter part of the race. But it was actually Antonelli who was by by far the fastest driver in that kind of latter stage, and I think he did a great job today, Kimi Antonelli. I think he should be very happy with his performance. You know, Leclerc was kind of holding the fort in P4. There was no way he was going to be catching the front three. The Ferrari just didn't have the pace, and Russell just kind of doing what he does and kind of just plodding around. And unfortunately, there was no events or accidents that would allow him to get on the podium today, which I'm sure he's maybe somewhat disappointed about. But the battle between Ferrari and Mercedes, while it's not kind of hit any explosive point, you can tell it's kind of it's brewing. I think it's going to be a close um, battle as the season goes on. We've already seen that both teams are capable of getting really good results. Um, but it's just going to be a matter of consistency who regularly finishes out on top, and I think that's going to change from weekend to weekend. The two cars seem quite track dependent, and they've got both teams are with new drivers. Hamilton's still figuring his way out through his Ferrari. Also slowly losing his patience with his engineer. It's it's uh, it's not like getting it bad, but it always seems to be at one point during every race weekend so far. Lewis has been like, "Yeah, you've already told me this," or like, "What do I need to do?" It's like, "Where am I slower?" It's like, "Where am I slower?" It's like, "You need to tell me." It's like, "Oh, like turn 8, turn 9, like 13, 14." It's like, "Yeah, but how much slower?" It's just he does seem to be having these little moments which are quite fun, but. Antonelli's I think he's doing a solid job as the kind of the early number two driver in Mercedes, and I'm interested to see how these teams develop, and when we move to a track like Bahrain next weekend, where there's more overtaking opportunities, it's generally better racing that we see. It'll be great to see how those two teams compare.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see them at, as you say, Bahrain, for example, where we do have more overtaking opportunities. And as, Kimi Antonelli is looking like a very promising talent. The stint that he did on those mediums today, putting him in that position then to push even harder on his hard tires, I should say, towards the end of the race as well. But looking ahead, then, well, further back, I should actually say, Jawad, to the battle of the midfield. Williams currently leading that battle with 19 points, but we did hear a very unhappy Alex Albon on the radio today about how the team set up his shifts. But he came home in P9 behind Hadjar, ahead of Ollie Behrman in the improved Haas. Is this a sign of pressure building at Williams as they finally have something to fight for?
Yeah, potentially, because this wasn't the first time that we heard Albon a bit testy on the radio. I can't remember if it was in Australia or in China. We saw him or heard him a bit short. But, I think with the added expectation and of being kind of top of the midfield now and a team that, has long suffered at the rear end of the grid, if they want to really improve in every metric and become a better team, then they have to be, as, we like to say, operationally sharp in all areas. So, I think not that because he did get a bit upset about, or he got a bit angry about the pit stop and not undercutting Oliver Behrman, but undercutting wouldn't have made the difference anyway. And the fact that they pitted after Behrman did and Albon still came out ahead meant that, okay, well, that argument was null and void. But, yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting year. Obviously, coming into the season, there was the talk of whether, with a more, competent teammate in Carlos Sainz, would Albon be properly tested, and, will we see him, crack under pressure as a result of it? But it's kind of been Albon's the one who's done better so far. He's had the better luck, of course, and just executed all round better too, as Sainz has gotten to grips with his new team and life at Williams. So, you know, sometimes I'm like, Alex, just chill. Things are going all pretty well. When he's sitting top 10 in the championship as well, is Albon seventh overall. So he's had a good start. He's obviously scored all but one of Williams's points as well in that midfield battle. So, I think, yeah, he just needs to stay composed. We saw a lot of composure from him in the last few years at Williams through those trying times. So let's not hope that a quicker car and a more increased expectation of results kind of take away that composure from him.
Yeah, he is usually a driver, we expect to hear being quite calm and composed, at least on the radio when it comes through. So, yeah, seeing a feisty side to Alex Albon, and hopefully it doesn't, actually have, repercussions on the team morale because, we want to see Williams, on a positive trajectory. Obviously, James Vowles is coming in and he's quite a calm, composed, team principal. So, that's kind of what we expect to see from Williams as well. But yeah, certainly a good point about them. Owain, Alpine then, obviously not necessarily in the midfield, but should be. They remain the only team to not score a point so far. But given Jack Doohan's very costly crash in free practice, I think I saw something of around 1.5 million euros worth of damage just to rebuild it. But will they be glad to have made it just through the weekend? And could Gasly have done anything more to actually finish inside the top 10?
To be honest with you, I don't think so. As you say, they should be in the midfield. Gasly qualified 11th. Obviously, like doing didn't have maybe so much time with the car, obviously going to his crash and maybe had a bit of confidence issues. But I think he recovered well to 15th. Apparently, they swapped the cars at some point during the race. Probably owing to yeah, forgot to do in Miss F1 as well. So not as familiar as maybe you'd want to be. It's a question really with Alpine if it was maybe the right choice to take out Doohan, who has not had that much confidence in the car, or is sort of just still bedding in with the team in a race seat compared to Gasly, who's been there quite a while and also knows his way around a number of these circuits. It's just one of these things where I think well maybe a strategy, that's why they swapped them, but otherwise they didn't really seem that potent at all. I don't know whether their race pace was suffering. I don't quite know how Gasly got held up that much, but both Sonoda and Alonso managed to get past him. Off the start, I think for Fernando Alonso, but apart from that, it was just so. It seemed quite, I guess, laboured would be the best way to put it. I mean, I'd love to tell you more about their race, but I don't think they did an awful lot. I think they kind of, they seem to have just been a bit ineffectual. And the most positive thing that you can take out of it is that Doohan made up 4 places. Ultimately, they are suffering with the fact that with the fact that Hulkenberg, got Haas, sorry, not Haas. I'm used to him being a Haas. Sauber 6 points, and as I say, that would be a season maker. And there they are sitting on the bottom, and it doesn't seem like they're going to get those 6 points to kind of overhaul that difference anytime soon. They don't, hopefully that going to Bahrain will help, but ultimately, I don't see a route out of the darkness for them. Currently, you know, they're struggling, and the fact that Gasly lost 2 places, unfortunately I don't know where, off a P11 start when you would be hoping to at least go a little bit forward. Maybe the experience of Gasly over Haas's Ollie Behrman might be enough to at least get him that one more place. They're starting on the preferred side of the track, and yet he couldn't do anything. So honestly, I think it's been sort of. I was going to say, the alarm bells must be constantly ringing at Alpine because it's just, you must think it's a permanent fire alarm test if you work at that factory because they're going nowhere fast but backwards. And that's not good enough for a works team. I mean, no wonder they're trying to sell it, but it's just not good enough for no wonder they're not even serving, giving anyone else engines because it's just absolutely abysmal. Yeah, I don't know where they go. They I don't know where they're going, but backwards seems to be the hefty bet.
Yeah, would you even want a Renault engine at this point? I don't think everyone that's got a Renault engine, has swiftly parted ways with it. You know, McLaren had it for basically what felt like what 3 seasons, and granted they performed well, but I think that was more McLaren and the rest of the teams themselves. But yeah, a good opening lap for Fernando Alonso, alongside Pierre Gasly for pretty much the entire first lap. Um, and that's kind of where Gasly then just never was able to make any momentum, seemingly. But Louis, let's take a step back really and just look at the bigger picture for this race. It was the earliest to have raced at Suzuka for the season, and there was a lot of talk about how it was much colder than normal. We saw very dry grass being set on fire by sparks from cars, which ultimately feels like it shouldn't really be an occurrence. Like it feels unacceptable that that happens during live sessions. Um, but we did see a race where drivers were pushing for effectively 50 laps with very little change. Like, is this just down to the time of the year? Like, what did you think about this race?
The thing is, like, trying to find a time and a place for Japan in the calendar is trickier than you might think. We're coming out of quite a uh, as a resident Japanese uh, resident, I we're coming out of quite a long winter, really cold winter, like a record snowfall this year. So it's spring has kicked in a bit later than it usually does. Um, Usually it's quite nice by now, but if I look out my window, I'm seeing the biggest like rain cloud, and it's pretty chilly. Um, but the thing is, then you can't do it in summer because summer in Japan is unbearably hot. It is crazy how hot and humid it gets. It would be, racing out in the day would be like racing out in Singapore. It would be brutal. Um, and then we have it where it used to be, which is peak typhoon season. So it's a really odd like time to like find a good spot. And to be honest, in maybe in future years it won't be so bad. But if we have like a more normal winter period, but yeah, it was cold. It was all a bit damp today. It wasn't ideal conditions for the racing that we usually see at Suzuka. I mean, overtaking is difficult, and we generally don't see many, but we never see like this few. Um, so it's it's a bit of a shame that it was all a bit of a mess. And yeah, the grass fires were just someone needed to go out with a hose for crying out loud. That's what I was saying in saying in our Slack chat all weekend. It's like, why didn't someone just go out with a hose and start just watering the grass? Let's dampen the ground a bit more because it did get a bit ridiculous when we had like 4 red flags or something for that kind of thing. That really shouldn't be happening. It's not like, well, we had it in China, was it last year? So it does happen, but I think it should be something that the FIA should break. It's like, let's just like drench the grass like a few days before the weekend. Let's get some moisture. Let's get some so it doesn't dry out and set fire. Because fun fact, sparks that come off the underside of an Formula One car are hot and they don't mix well with dry grass, which is incredibly flammable. And we've been having actually quite a lot of wildfires. We had one in Imabari and one in Okayama recently, which is not too far from where the track is, relatively. So it's something that maybe they should have thought about.
As long as their solution for the grass fires is not by removing the grass and replacing it with tarmac runoff, because that would be worse. I think we will all agree on this podcast that's probably going to be worse, as shambolic as it is to see the session stopping because of fire.
I wouldn't mind it if it was that like drag strip stuff that they had at the outside of Hockenheim. So when it rains, it just becomes a smooth ice rink. I don't think that would be so bad. But yeah, let's keep the grass. Let's keep the grass.
Keep the grass. Definitely don't go for the Paul Ricard style either. That would be even worse. I'm glad that that's gone too. But Jawad, finally, before we move on to our driver of the day, was this a good race?
I mean, good is a subjective term, isn't it? Those who like chess matches and a bit of a slow burn might tell you, oh, that was a fantastic race. We had no reliability issues, all the cars finished, no safety cars either, no VSCs. And considering, the build-up we had to the weekend with practice, as you say, there was four red flags in FP2, we had grass fires, we had cars crashing. It did seem like a bit of a tame race, but on the flip side, for the entertainment's sake, you're kind of like, well, why didn't anyone take any risks at the front? Like everyone just seemed to play it very conservatively, and particularly McLaren as well. But I think when you look in the greater scheme of things, the entertainment was there, and the fact that championship wise, we got a different winner. We have not just a McLaren domination as well. We've got Max Verstappen entering the conversation as being in contention for a fifth world title as well this year. So, long term, like, in terms of the whole year, yeah, it probably seems a lot more exciting than just watching it as a standalone was. And, we're going to get one or two of those every now and again. I mean, it's a 24 race season. Can't expect to have a banger after banger. And also, we're also spoiled for the fact that there's been so many iconic Suzuka moments in F1 history as well. So we're not always going to get that. I mean, yeah, we kind of thought maybe we'd get a Senna v Prost into turn one, like 89 with Stappen and Norris this time out, but it wasn't going to happen. So yeah, it was not a bad race, but I'm not going to be certainly watching the replay anytime soon.
Yeah, when we saw Verstappen and Norris lining up on the grid at what was basically like a 45-degree angle pointing towards each other, it was like maybe we will see some sparks that aren't, just coming from the skid blocks. But then, Verstappen did get a great start and just did exactly what he needed to do, as we said. And as you just pointed out as well, a season is not like a race itself does not make a season, but a season, is more it's about the greater narrative. It's the bigger picture, as I said, we're not gonna F1 is not Severance. We're not going to see banger after banger after banger. We're going to see a full season narrative instead. But let's move on to our drivers of the day because we should still focus on at least today's race. But Grid Talk gave it to Max Verstappen. As I've said, he got off the line well and just controlled the race from there. But Owain, do you agree with that? Who's your driver of the day today?
I really struggled to pick to the point where I actually didn't get my driver of the day in to vote for that, unfortunately. Yeah, part of me wanted to get, obviously wanted to give it to Max Verstappen because he did such a great job, but I think you have to give it to Isaac Hadjar because he's done such a good sort of recovery from, the obviously the ignominy of a DNS. Just due to a mistake, obviously in Australia. Compared to now, um, you know, qualifying seventh, unfortunately finishing eighth, so he did get overtaken. But still, that's a great haul of points, and it currently places him the highest placed Red Bull contracted driver that's not Max Verstappen. I think that's obviously those have all come in this race, but I think he's actually really showing that he's a proper talent, and he should be paid attention to. And I think it sort of assuages some of the fears that he might lose his confidence. Whereas, on a driver's circuit, he's, in not the most tricky conditions, but not the easiest either. He's done a great job.
A great job. Tough time in qualifying yesterday in more ways than one. Louis, your driver of the day for the Japanese Grand Prix, please.
Well, in our Slack poll, I voted for Max Verstappen, and honestly, I don't have much of a reason to kind of change that. As I said earlier, like Max drove and almost as perfect race as you can, given the circumstances. Yeah, both McLarens behind him. He never put a foot wrong, withstood any pressure. He was calm, cool, collected, doing everything that he needed to do. And honestly, um, that's that's what it takes. That's what it you need to be. And despite the fact he's driving possibly the fourth fastest car on the grid, he's second in the championship, 1 point off someone who is meant to be in an absolute rocket ship dominant car that's meant to be miles ahead. But he's done a great job, and just like he did in Australia as well, it's a thoroughly deserved um, win, and I think he's definitely driver of the day.
Yeah, well reasoned. Jawad, your driver of the day, Max Verstappen or someone else?
Yeah, I'm gonna stick with my vote and go with Max and add to Louis' point as well. Max is single-handedly carrying Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship at the moment because none of his teammates that he's had have scored and they're third overall. So, you talk about the narrative coming into this weekend with, tension between Max and his team and talk of, how they're not listening to him and everything like that. Even regardless of all that, this is all down to driver performance, and this is why, he'll go down in the history books one day being the all-time greats if it carries on this way. So yeah, this was definitely one of the best performances we've seen from him. And the fact that none of us, just talking off air as well, asking what our predictions were for this weekend, none of us had Verstappen in the conversation for top three or for pole position. And realistically wasn't up until the dying stages of Q3 and then pulled an absolute, banger of a lap out to take pole. And yeah, then just control the race as he does normally when with two faster cars behind him. I think, this is where that maturity of the being a seasoned champion, which he is now, even though he's not even 30 years of age yet, geez, will come into play against the likes of Norris and Piastri as they, potentially fight for their first titles this year.
Yeah, we're three races in, obviously, but given the context of where Max's car is performing, versus where Max is performing, if he does pull the championship out of the bag, it'll be probably one of the better ones. But that's our driver of the day. Let us know who you thought was the driver of the day, either in the live chat if you're watching live, or let us know on socials or in the comments below. If you're watching afterwards. Owain, anything you want to plug at this opportunity?
I'd like to plug our Grid Talk socials. So if you want to keep up to date on our thoughts on anything F1, which is probably just going to be the revolving Red Bull driver debacle, to be quite honest with you, then make sure you hit us up and follow us on Grid Talk UK. On at Grid Talk UK on all of the social media platforms with the at. I've said it enough and I completely messed it up. That's where you'll find us. Come follow us on Threads. Come follow us on Blue Sky. Give us a shout. Come talk to us. It's a great time.
You had one job, Owain. One job. Louis, anything you want to plug at this point?
I say we just fire Owain. For me,
You can't fire me. I'm not paid.
okay, that makes it easier then. Uh, no, for me, I just want to plug some of our other stuff that we do on Grid Talk. So last weekend was round four of the Grill the Grid Talk came out. The fifth and final round will be coming out after this triple header that we're having. So you can see how the rest of them have all got on in the final round and the who came out as champion on top, and also our Patreon where you can get exclusive podcast. I keep saying behind the grid talk, it isn't. It's beyond the grid talk, where it's more of like grid talk, sort of uncut. It's we listen to what you want to us to talk about. It's a bit more free flowing. So if you want to listen to that and get all the other Patreon benefits, make sure to check out our Patreon.
Yeah, definitely do check out Beyond the Grid Talk on our Patreon. The most recent episode, we talked in depth about the Red Bull driver debacle, and I had a lot of fun doing so. And obviously, it's a channel where we are able to be a bit more opinionated and less behind the restrictions that come alongside monetization, etc., etc. So, yes, please do go and check out our Patreon. Jawad, anything you want to plug at this point?
Yeah, so I write articles for a website called theraw.com.au and got quite a bit of coverage at the Australian Grand Prix earlier this year. My colleague Ben wrote an excellent article from a one-on-one interview we did with Pedro Della Rosa, Aston Martin team ambassador these days, but back in the day was a driver for teams like McLaren as well. And we had such a great chat with Pedro, talking all things from F1, MotoGP, and even Melbourne coffee as well. He loves the coffee here. So I know we were talking about that off air earlier. So yeah, go check that out, I'd say.
Very nice. Pedro de la Rosa, I believe, the driver with the most amount of testing miles as well.
Yeah,
Um,
his career is very much known for how much test driver duties he's had. I think he's test driven for both McLaren, Ferrari, pretty much anywhere Fernando Alonso has been in his career. Pedro Della Rosa has not been too far behind.
Incredible. And if you want to hear more from me, I'm on Threads and Instagram at Ruby Rose Price and on Blue Sky at Rubes, Rubez. But if you want to hear more from Grid Talk, it's available on YouTube, where our race review shows are recorded live, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Verbal, and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. Thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign up to our Patreon for exclusive content? Also, make sure you subscribe so you're the first to know when each new episode is released, and we'll be back soon with plenty more content. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast, and goodbye. And as we transition into what is going to be a brief post show, just want to take this question from Jared Bradley, came through in the live chat. It was, um, how did you all stay awake through the entire race? I was gaming on my other screen to keep myself occupied. Now, obviously, it's the last race of the start of the season where, us Brits, me and Owain, are having to wake up at those unreasonable hours in the morning, and I'm getting the little violin out now, in anticipation. Um, but yeah, we've spoken about this race, whether it was a good race or not, how it was a race of strategy, not necessarily much going on track, but yeah, like I found myself flagging, but I don't tend to function well before 10 a.m. anyway. How did you find the race, Owen?
I'll be honest with you, I was fine. Got up at got up at 5:55. Quickly dived in front of the t TV and turned on the box and stuff. Um, I think I was, yeah. I like normally, well, not normally, but sometimes there's occasions where I find myself flagging during the race, but I didn't even bother with a drink. I didn't even have a tea or anything like that. Um, to keep me going with that. So I think I just got lucky and just like woke up at exactly the point I was in sort of a lighter stage of sleep. Um, yeah, and then managed to just sort of not power through, but just kind of sit there and watch it happen. Um, so I was kind of okay. It was a surprisingly all right, I think. But I think that's also owing to going to bed like relatively early. So that's kind of it. It's have a functional sleep schedule. That's my advice, which I know is terrible advice. Doesn't work.
It doesn't work when you're a Formula One fan either. Louis, what were you doing during the race?
I was watching the football, to be completely honest. I mean, I had like my laptop was watching the football, my TV was watching the F1. I had like the speaker, like I had the speakers on for my TV, and I had my laptop muted, but I was pretty much only watching the football. I was just listening to the Japanese commentary kind of just ramble on. It's like, oh, all they cared about, by the way, on the first lap was where's Yuki? Where's Yuki? I can't see Yuki. Where is he? That's all they were going. They were like, there's no. They're like, no, that's Haja. No, that's Laws. Where's Yuki? And that's all they were doing for like the first lap, and it's like because and
Is that because someone decided to
they
paint the Red Bull white?
yeah. I mean, I was having a hard time because they kept going on it. I was like, yeah, where is Yuki? I can't actually see him. Um, yeah, the so I was just listening to them while just watching the third division Japanese football team that I support draw to the team that's bottom of the league.
Well, at least it didn't lose. But yeah, just obviously touching on what you were saying about the paint job, it being very like I was surprised, obviously that we didn't see changes to the Racing Bulls livery just because of obviously how similar the main Red Bull livery was going to be, and of course being owned by the same corporation, they're probably able to be like, oh, so you're going to do a special livery? How about we change it so that we don't look like the exact same car? But I feel like the yellow at the very least did help be a distinguishing factor. It was just determining which driver was which because of course they're all wearing the same basic helmet design anyway. But Jawad, did you have to have anything going on in the background to keep your way through the Japanese Grand Prix today?
No, just my usual doing my live blog for every race, which requires me to be attentive and awake. So you can imagine how those races at 2, 3 a.m. in the morning will be for me. But yeah, no, thankfully didn't need any stimulants or caffeine for this one. Just had a nice lunch and lots of water. So yeah, it's almost dinner time now, so I'm looking forward to that.
Oof. Yeah, I'm looking forward to races where, they finish and it's dinner time,
Yeah.
for us as well. But at the very least, it's good that, you guys over where you are, I think Louis just watched someone either score or, you know,
No, I've just seen what time the Bahrain Grand Prix starts.
oh
Yeah,
no.
what is it? Midnight for you,
Midnight.
Louis? Yeah, 1 a.m. over here. So it's business as usual from now on.
Business as usual. It really does put it into perspective, I think, as well. Like obviously having the two of you on where, you're geographically located, you know, it helps at least me and Owain stay humble when we're complaining about race start times, even if it has basically just been me, because someone can wake up with a functioning sleep schedule. But yeah,
I
thank you.
apologize.
You apologize, but yeah, thank you very much if you have joined us for today's show, and specifically the post show too. Bahrain's coming up. It's going to be, a return to more normal times, for some of us, and hopefully, we will see some good action in terms of the race. But other than that, thank you very much for joining us today, and we will see you next time.